who suffered from cerebral palsy and severe epilepsy, was taken ill overnight and died at St Mary's Hospital in Paddington early this morning. David and Samantha would ask that their privacy is respected at this terribly difficult time. Let's talk to Nick Robinson, our political editor. We were just talking to Vicky Young. There are moments where actually politics takes a sidebar to what is a very personal, a private moment, really.
That's right. In many ways, no one wants to talk. There are no words that are adequate when somebody loses a child. And yet when the father of that child is someone who might be our next Prime Minister, is a very prominent figure in public life, it's inevitable. It's inevitable for another reason, of course, that we talk about it, which is that the short life of Ivan and now his tragic death has shaped the man that David Cameron is. I made a documentary recently about the Tory leader and talked to many of his friends who don't normally talk in public, and they explained how the birth of a severely disabled child had really altered the public and the private persona of David Cameron. It forced a man from a very privileged background to confront the hardships that many families live through. It shaped his attitudes to the NHS. It has shaped his attitudes to public service. It has altered, I think, in many ways, his personality and his character. And now having to live not just with the loss of a loved child, but that loss in public, of course, is bound to shape the man who wants to be our next Prime Minister.
And, Nick, you know him well, and what do you think about his resilience to this? Do you feel that it's been within his expectation? I mean, we were hearing there from the professional that life expectancy for children with these set of problems is diminished as a result of the difficulties they've faced. Do you think that's been part of his mental universe?
Oh, I think he knew, and I think Samantha, his wife, knew, of course, that Ivan's life would be short. They lived with constant health scares. I was once to report on a speech that David Cameron was delivering, and I had a phone call from him because he was expecting to be interviewed by me, saying, look, I'm not going to be able to be there. I could hear the sound of a car, and he was driving his son not just to the local hospital, but some 50 or 60 miles to a regional hospital that would have the facilities needed to look after him. So they lived constantly with health scares, constantly with emergency visits to the hospital. And yet, of course, nothing prepares you for the death of someone you love. Nothing prepares you properly for the fact that someone around whom the Camerons have had to build their lives is no longer there. And dealing with that while having two other children is difficult enough, but dealing with it in the public gaze is even harder, because so many people will want to express their sympathy for him at a time when some people can escape through work. Some people can use work to talk about something else, and for a very long time David Cameron may find it very hard to do that. It is worth saying that he really was very severely disabled, Ivan. One story that a friend of his told me, just to capture that and to capture how important any minor improvement in his condition was to the Camerons, is this. For a long time, not only could Ivan not walk or talk, but because of the drugs he was on, he couldn't smile either. So there were very few responses that his parents got from him, despite the fact they held him enormously if you went to visit them at their house. I'm told that Ivan would often be held on one or other of his father or of his mother's laps. But after a change of drug treatment, Ivan got his smile back, was how David Cameron put it. And those who worked with Mr Cameron said it utterly transformed his mood and his attitude, because Ivan had got his smile back. So these small changes, anybody listening or watching who has a disabled child will know this, make a massive difference to someone's lives. And obviously then after all that love and care and time that you put into a child's life, to lose them, there are no words that capture that.
You don't need words when you're looking at this picture. It's the Christmas card they issued last year. The two clearly had a very, very special bond.
That's absolutely right. And there is now, just to make a sort of broader and more political point, there is now an extraordinary bond between the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition, who, let's be honest, are not great fans of each other personally. But it is rare in these days to lose a child, and to lose a child young. And yet both the Prime Minister and the man who would be Prime Minister, David Cameron, have. Remember that Gordon Brown, in rather similar circumstances, had to publicly deal with the loss of his first child, baby Jennifer, who died, of course, much younger. I recall, I think she was 10 days old. And he had to live with that grief, and the fact that that grief would shape who he was and that he'd be asked questions about it. And this is very unusual indeed to have two figures in public life who've both lived through this sort of tragedy.
Well, Nick, just to return to the political for a moment, two figures, as you say, private tragedies, but they would, in normal circumstances, have been confronting each other in the Commons today at Prime Minister's Questions. Do you have any idea how the political business of the nation proceeds today or this week?
Well, I know from the Conservative Party that William Hague will become acting leader while David Cameron takes time off. That means that he will appear in his place today at Prime Minister's Questions and fill in his other diary engagements. I haven't had officially confirmed from Downing Street, but I've no doubt at all that Gordon Brown will stand aside and allow Harriet Harman, I would imagine, to also take part in Prime Minister's Questions today. He will appreciate, Downing Street will appreciate that this is a day in which politics is likely to be pretty much suspended. Now, of course, it has to go on. Politics always goes on, but for today at least, and for Prime Minister's Questions, I think you'll expect a pretty sombre atmosphere in the Commons, and that it will be deputies and not David Cameron and Gordon Brown who are clashing.
Nick, before I know you must leave us, but in terms of David Cameron and Samantha Cameron, that they've asked for privacy, and that will be respected. We've got a very difficult week actually ahead of us now, haven't we?
Yeah, it's very difficult for them, not just obviously for all the reasons personally we've been saying, but because David Cameron has to make a decision about how to handle this in the public eye, at what stage to be seen, at what stage to talk about it, at what level to talk about it. I can only say that these things will be massively out of his mind at the moment. Although his son Ivan was severely disabled, this was not a death that was expected any minute or second or day. As my understanding is, he was taken ill in the early hours of this morning and died, I think, around 6:30 this morning. But I was talking to a friend of the Camerons who saw them yesterday, and he was in chirpy form, David Cameron. He was laughing and joking. There was no suggestion that this tragedy was imminent. And so once he's dealt with everything he has to within his family, he will obviously have some difficult decisions to take about what to say and when. But I think people will give him some space before those decisions have to be taken.
Nick Robinson, thank you very much indeed.